Imagine walking through the French countryside and suddenly finding yourself surrounded by thousands of ancient stones. Not one monument, not 10, thousands. Some stand alone. Others stretch across the landscape in enormous lines, continuing far beyond what the eye can see. They were placed here thousands of years before the pyramids of Giza were built. But there is one problem. We still don't know exactly why. Who organized these enormous constructions? How did prehistoric communities move stones weighing hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilograms? And, perhaps most importantly, why did they build Carnac? This is the mystery of the Carnac stones. In Brittany, on the western coast of France, lies one of the most extraordinary prehistoric landscapes in Europe. The region around Carnac contains thousands of megalithic stones, spread across fields, roads, forests, and open countryside. Among the most famous are the great stone alignments of Carnac, Carnac, and Carnac. From the ground, the experience can be almost overwhelming. Stone after stone appears to follow the landscape. Some are small, others rise several meters above the ground, and when viewed from above, their arrangement becomes even more remarkable. Long rows of stones appear to form enormous patterns across the countryside, but these stones aren't simply scattered randomly. They were deliberately placed, and they were placed by people who lived thousands of years ago, long before written history. The people who created them left no written explanation. No inscription tells us what Carnac meant. No ancient text describes the ceremonies that may have taken place here. So today, archaeologists are left with something both fascinating and frustrating. The monument survives, but its original meaning is largely lost. When people think about ancient monuments, they often imagine Egypt, the pyramids, the temples, the tombs of kings. But Carnac takes us much further back. The construction of the major megalithic monuments in the region began during the Neolithic period, thousands of years ago. These were communities of farmers, herders, craftspeople, and builders. They did not have modern machinery. They did not have steel cranes. They did not have engines or trucks. And yet, somehow, they transformed enormous stones into a monumental landscape. This is one of the first mysteries of Carnac. How? Imagine standing beside one of these massive stones. Now imagine having to move it, without wheels as we know them, without heavy machinery, without modern roads. The task would have required planning, cooperation, and enormous physical effort. Archaeologists have proposed that prehistoric builders could have used combinations of wooden structures, ropes, rollers, sledges, and prepared pathways. But even if we understand some of the possible techniques, another question remains. Why would an entire community spend so much time and energy doing this? Moving one massive stone would already be an achievement. Carnac contains thousands. That suggests something important. These monuments were not accidental. They were the result of organized human effort. Someone had a reason to build them. Someone convinced people to participate. And generation after generation maintained the tradition. This is where the mystery becomes much deeper. There is no single explanation universally accepted for the purpose of the Carnac alignments. One possibility is that they had a religious or ritual function. The Neolithic people who built these monuments lived in a world where nature, death, fertility, ancestors, and the cycles of the seasons may have been deeply connected. The stones could have formed sacred spaces where communities gathered for ceremonies. Another possibility is that they were connected to burial and ancestor worship. The wider Carnac region contains other megalithic structures, including dolmens and burial monuments. These monuments suggest that the landscape may have been closely associated with the dead. Perhaps the stones helped create a connection between the living community and its ancestors. But there are other possibilities. The alignments may have been used as places for gatherings. They could have helped organize movement through the landscape. They may have represented territories or social identities. Or perhaps their meaning changed over centuries. And this possibility is especially important. Carnac wasn't necessarily built all at once. The landscape developed over long periods of prehistoric history. Different generations may have added, modified, or reused monuments. So instead of asking, what was Carnac for? Perhaps we should ask, what did Carnac mean to different people at different times? One of the most fascinating ideas surrounding prehistoric monuments is astronomy. Could Carnac have been designed to interact with the movement of the sun or other celestial bodies? Some researchers have proposed astronomical interpretations for certain prehistoric monuments, and Carnac has attracted similar speculation. The enormous scale and apparent organization of the alignments naturally invite questions about whether the builders were observing celestial cycles, the sun, the seasons, the changing length of days, perhaps even important moments in the agricultural year. But there is a crucial distinction. A pattern that looks astronomical does not automatically prove that it was designed as an astronomical instrument. Some proposed alignments remain controversial. Archaeology has not produced a definitive answer that Carnac was a giant prehistoric observatory, and this uncertainty is important, because the mystery of Carnac becomes less interesting when we pretend we know something that we don't. The real story is that we are still trying to understand the intentions of people who left us no written explanation. There is another clue hidden throughout the landscape. The Carnac region contains numerous dolmens and burial monuments. A dolmen typically consists of large stones forming a chamber, often covered by additional material. These structures appear to have been connected to burial practices, and that tells us something about the worldview of the people who built them. For these communities, the dead were not necessarily separated from everyday life. Their monuments remained in the landscape. They were visible. They could be visited. They became permanent features of the world inhabited by the living. The standing stones may therefore have been part of a much larger symbolic landscape, a landscape where people could gather, remember ancestors, perform rituals, and connect themselves to places that had existed long before them. Perhaps the stones weren't simply monuments. Perhaps they were anchors of memory. But Carnac has another story, and this one doesn't come from archaeology. It comes from legend. According to local tradition, the stones were once Roman soldiers. The story is associated with Saint Cornelius, who was said to have been pursued by Roman troops. When the soldiers caught up with him, Cornelius supposedly turned them to stone, and those petrified soldiers became the rows of stones we see today. Of course, archaeology tells us something very different. The stones were already ancient long before the Roman period, but legends like this are still fascinating because they reveal something about how later generations tried to understand a landscape whose true origins had already become mysterious. Imagine living centuries after the stones were created. You see thousands of enormous rocks arranged across the countryside. You don't know who built them. You don't know why. Eventually, stories appear. The landscape becomes mythology, and Carnac becomes more than an archaeological site. It becomes part of the cultural memory of Brittany. There is another fascinating chapter in Carnac's story. For centuries, the stones existed as part of the local landscape, but the monuments were never completely protected from human activity. Agriculture, roads, construction, erosion, and changing land use have all affected the site. Some stones have disappeared, others have fallen, some have been moved or damaged, and over time the original landscape has inevitably changed. That means something important. When we look at Carnac today, we are not necessarily seeing exactly what prehistoric people saw. We are looking at the remains of a much larger landscape, a landscape altered by thousands of years of human history. And that makes the surviving stones even more valuable, because every remaining stone is a fragment of a story that began long before written records. After thousands of years of research, we still don't have one definitive answer. Perhaps Carnac was a sacred landscape. Perhaps it was connected to ancestors and the dead. Perhaps the alignments were used for ceremonies and gatherings. Perhaps celestial observations played a role. Perhaps they helped define territories and communities. Or perhaps Carnac served several purposes at once. There is another possibility that is easy to overlook. Maybe the question itself is wrong. We tend to imagine that ancient monuments must have had one specific function: a temple, a tomb, an observatory, a calendar. But prehistoric landscapes may not have worked that way. Carnac could have been a place where religion, community, memory, astronomy, death, and identity all came together. The stones didn't need to have only one meaning. They may have carried many. And perhaps this is the most fascinating part of Carnac. We often look at prehistoric monuments and focus on the stones, their size, their age, their arrangement, their mystery. But behind every stone were people. People who farmed, people who built homes, people who raised children, people who buried their dead, people who watched the seasons change, and people who decided that something important enough to be remembered should be built into the landscape. We don't know their names. We don't know their languages. We don't know what they called these places. We don't know exactly what they believed, but their work survived them. Thousands of years later, we are still standing among their stones. Today, Carnac is one of the world's most extraordinary prehistoric landscapes, but its greatest mystery isn't simply how the stones were moved. It isn't even how they were arranged. The deeper mystery is why. Why did prehistoric communities dedicate so much time and effort to creating these monumental alignments? What happened here? What did people see when they stood among the stones thousands of years ago? Did they see a sacred landscape, a place of ancestors, a map of the heavens, a place for ceremonies, or something we don't even have the words to describe? We may never know for certain, and perhaps that's what makes Carnac so compelling. The stones have survived, but their meaning disappeared. Thousands of stones, thousands of years, and almost no words left behind. Carnac reminds us that history isn't always a story written in books. Sometimes history is written in stone. The people who built these monuments vanished long ago. Their world disappeared, their beliefs disappeared, but their stones remained. And every time we walk between those ancient lines, we are confronted with the same question they left behind. Why? Maybe one day archaeology will reveal the answer. Or maybe Carnac will remain one of those rare places where the mystery is part of the monument itself. If you enjoyed this journey into one of Europe's greatest prehistoric mysteries, subscribe to Curiousphere for more stories about the places, civilizations, and mysteries that shaped our world. And tell us in the comments, what do you think Carnac was built for? Until next time, keep questioning history.